My name is Hazel, and I'm 32 years old. He didn't recognize me when I quietly paid for his groceries. His card had declined, and he looked so lost, so embarrassed. Years ago, that same man stood in front of a classroom and humiliated me for not being good enough. Back then, I said nothing, but this time, I let my silence speak for me. If you'd told me 15 years ago that I'd be standing behind a grocery checkout counter at this age, smiling through plastic gloves and scanning barcodes like clockwork, I would have laughed. Not because the job is beneath me, it's honest work, but because I once thought I was going to change the world with words. Back in college, I was the girl who carried notebooks everywhere, scribbling half-finished poems on coffee napkins and typing up late-night essays about human kindness. I wanted to be a journalist, one of those people who uncover the truth, who tell stories that matter. But life doesn't care about dreams when rent is due and your mother's medication costs more than your paycheck. I dropped out halfway through my degree. My dad had passed away the year before, and Mom's health was declining fast. A stroke had left her half paralyzed, and suddenly I became both caretaker and breadwinner. My world shrank from lecture halls and newsroom ambitions to fluorescent aisles and the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of grocery scanners. It was Tuesday evening, our slowest day, the kind of day when the hum of the freezers feels louder than people's chatter. I was halfway through my shift, scanning items for a young mother with 2 kids climbing on her cart when I heard it. A voice, smooth, deep, and unmistakably familiar. Hazel? At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. That name doesn't get called much these days. I turned slowly, forcing a polite smile, and there he was. Mr. Callahan, my old English teacher. The man who once told me I'd be the next great storyteller of our generation. Only now, he wasn't smiling like a proud mentor. He was smirking, tilting his head with mock surprise, holding a basket filled with organic produce and a bottle of imported wine. "So this is where you ended up," he said, his voice carrying that same smug authority he used to wield in class. I froze. For a split second, I forgot how to breathe. Around us, other customers looked up from their phones. I saw one woman raise an eyebrow. My face burned, but I kept my composure. "Yes, Mr. Callahan," I said softly, scanning his items. "How have you been?" He gave a half laugh, low, condescending. "Oh, you know, retired now. Doing some writing here and there. Never expected to see one of my best students here." He gestured vaguely to the store, his smile dripping with pity. "Life's funny, isn't it?" I forced a polite laugh, though my heart thudded painfully. "Yes, it is." He leaned on the counter, studying me. "You had so much potential. I remember your essay on Hemingway. It was brilliant." "What happened, Hazel?" That word, "what happened," stabbed like a blade. The question wasn't genuine curiosity, it was judgment, disguised as concern. I wanted to tell him, to explain about Mom's stroke, about the double shifts, the nights I fell asleep over textbooks I couldn't afford to keep, but instead I just smiled and said, "Life took me in a different direction." He chuckled, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. "Well, not everyone gets to chase their dreams, I suppose." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I scanned the last item, a box of herbal tea, and handed him the receipt. "That'll be $32.75. He slid his card through the reader and said, almost to himself, "Such wasted potential." The words hung in the air long after he walked away. For a few seconds I stood still, the scanner light blinking red in front of me. A woman cleared her throat impatiently, snapping me back to reality. "Ma'am, you okay?" I nodded quickly and started scanning again, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, my chest felt tight. All through the evening, I replayed that moment. His smirk, his tone, his words. "So this is where you ended up." It wasn't just an insult, it was a reminder of everything I'd lost. The years I spent believing I'd make something of myself, only to end up invisible behind a register. By closing time, I felt hollow. My coworkers were joking near the break room, but I just clocked out quietly, grabbed my coat, and walked into the chilly night air. The parking lot lights flickered above the cracked asphalt. I sat in my old Corolla, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the window. He made me feel like I'd failed, not because of where I worked, but because he still held power over me after all these years. When I got home, Mom was asleep on the couch, the TV flickering softly. I covered her with a blanket and sat beside her, feeling the exhaustion sink deep into my bones. I thought of all those essays he used to praise, the way he once called me a natural storyteller. Maybe he was right back then. Maybe I was meant to write. But somewhere between caring for Mom and keeping the lights on, that part of me got buried. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. My eyes drifted to a dusty box on the top shelf, an old storage bin I hadn't opened in years. I remembered what was inside: my notebooks, my essays, pieces of myself I'd locked away. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not shame, but fire. I whispered under my breath, my voice steady, almost daring. "We'll see about that, Mr. Callahan." And as the words left my lips, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of another one. Hazel's quiet defiance marks the start of her emotional and moral comeback. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, Mr. Callahan's smirk, that subtle lift of his eyebrows as if my existence behind that grocery counter confirmed something he'd always believed. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly everything changed. Once, he was the reason I believed I could do something extraordinary. Back in high school, English was the only class where I felt alive. I was 17, full of dreams too big for my small town. While other students groaned about essays, I cherished them. Words were my escape, each sentence a doorway to something brighter. Mr. Callahan saw that in me from the start. He was different from other teachers. He spoke with passion, quoting Shakespeare like it was gospel, and making metaphors sound like spells. When he read my first essay, an analysis of The Great Gatsby, he called me after class. "Hazel," he'd said, smiling proudly, "you have something special. The way you see people, their quiet tragedies, their little victories, it's rare. You could be a Pulitzer winner one day." That compliment lived in my chest for years. I remember going home and writing it in bold letters across my notebook, "Pulitzer winner one day." He became my mentor, my guide. He'd hand me extra reading material, comment on my stories, and even submitted one of my essays to a state-level writing contest without telling me. I won second place. The day he announced it to the class, everyone clapped, and I felt weightless. But life has a cruel way of testing how much joy you're allowed to keep. It started the summer before senior year. My dad lost his job at the auto plant. Suddenly, everything we'd taken for granted, the electricity, the groceries, the mortgage, became a question mark. I got a part-time job at a diner to help out, working late nights and weekends. By the time classes started again, I was exhausted all the time. My grades slipped, my spark dimmed. At first, Mr. Callahan was patient. He asked if everything was okay. I told him I was just tired, that things were rough at home. He nodded, but didn't press. For a few weeks, he still encouraged me. But then the tone changed. It was small things at first. A sigh when he handed back my essays. A shake of his head when I struggled to contribute in class discussions. Then came the sarcasm. "Hazel, I expected more from you. Guess the Pulitzer might have to wait." The day that burned itself into my memory happened in March. We were discussing a short story assignment. I'd stayed up late writing mine, trying to balance work and school, but I couldn't finish it. I turned in what I had, hoping he'd understand. He didn't. He called me out in front of everyone. "Hazel, I read your draft. What happened to you? This isn't your best work." His voice was sharp, impatient. I tried to explain, but he didn't let me. "Excuses don't make good writing," he said loudly, pacing the front of the classroom. "You either have the discipline or you don't." A few students snickered. My face burned hot. I stared at my desk, my throat tight. He added, "Talent means nothing without consistency. Maybe some of you," he looked straight at me, "need to decide if this is really your path." Laughter rippled through the room. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. After class, I stood by his desk, trembling. "Mr. Callahan," I said quietly, "my dad lost his job. I've been working nights to help my family. I'm trying." He looked at me with something almost like pity, but laced with disappointment. "You're smart, Hazel. But life doesn't care about your excuses. If you want to succeed, you can't let circumstances control you. I walked out holding back tears. That day, I promised myself I'd never give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. But when I got home, I did. I cried until my chest ached. I stopped writing after that. Every time I tried, I'd hear his voice in my head, telling me I wasn't disciplined enough, not good enough. I avoided English class whenever I could. My stories, once colorful and alive, became just words on a page I couldn't bear to finish. By graduation, I had completely faded from his radar. When I walked across the stage, he gave me a polite nod and nothing more. No, congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just a fleeting glance that made me feel like a disappointment he couldn't wait to forget. After that, I tried to bury that part of myself. The writer, the dreamer, the girl who once believed her words could change the world. I convinced myself that survival mattered more than ambition. But standing in that grocery store years later, hearing him say, "So this is where you ended up," brought it all crashing back. It was like every humiliation, every cutting remark, every missed opportunity came alive again. For the rest of the week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd find myself staring at customers, but seeing high school faces instead. I remembered the sound of the class laughing, his voice echoing through the room, the way my stomach twisted as I tried not to cry. It wasn't just anger I felt, it was grief. Grief for the version of me that believed in herself. One night, after Mom went to bed, I found myself standing in front of that old storage shelf again. I pulled down the dusty plastic bin I hadn't opened in over a decade. It was heavier than I remembered, filled with notebooks covered in doodles and faded ink. I carried it to the kitchen table, brushing off a layer of dust. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were years of my life, stories, essays, poems, all the pieces of a girl who once thought her words could touch people's hearts. On top lay a black leather notebook, edges frayed and pages curled. I recognized it instantly. It was the one I'd used in Mr. Callahan's class, the one that held my best work, the one he'd once praised before everything fell apart. I opened it slowly. The first page had a quote scribbled in my teenage handwriting. "The words you write today are the wings you'll use tomorrow." Underneath it, I'd written, "Mr. Callahan." I stared at it for a long time. My chest tightened, but not from pain. Something stirred inside me, an ache mixed with longing, but also fire. I flipped through the pages, reading lines I'd forgotten, stories half finished, dreams half formed. The words were clumsy in places, naive even, but there was heart. There was me. That night, something shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the cashier Mr. Callahan mocked. I felt like the girl who used to stay up writing by flashlight, believing she could matter. I traced my name written in faded ink at the bottom of a page and whispered to the quiet room, "Maybe it's time I start again." Hazel opens her old notebook, rediscovering her lost passion, the spark that will drive her comeback. For days after opening that old notebook, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt like finding a time capsule of the person I used to be, someone brave enough to dream without fear of failure. I carried the notebook with me everywhere, flipping through it during lunch breaks, before bed, even while waiting for customers to finish bagging their groceries. Each page was like a whisper from the past. "Remember me? You used to believe in something." Most of the stories were rough, unpolished, written with the clumsy earnestness of a teenage girl who thought she understood the world, but there was heart in them, raw emotion that made my throat tighten. Among them was one title that caught my breath, "The Weight of Silence." That story had once been my pride and joy. Mr. Callahan had praised it during my junior year, calling it haunting and mature. I hadn't looked at it since. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The handwriting was a little faded, my loops uneven, but as I read, I could feel myself being pulled in. It was about a young girl who lost her voice after trauma, only to rediscover it through writing letters she never sent. It wasn't perfect. Some sentences dragged, some metaphors were heavy, but the emotion, it was real. I read the final line. "Sometimes silence is louder than the truth we're too afraid to speak." And before I knew it, tears were sliding down my cheeks. It hit me. I still loved this. I still loved storytelling. That night, after putting Mom to bed, I sat at my desk with my old laptop. It took forever to start up. It wheezed and flickered, as if waking from a long nap. I opened a blank document, staring at the cursor blinking on an empty page. I didn't know where to begin. It had been over a decade since I'd written anything serious, but eventually I started typing. At first it was awkward, like trying to speak a language I'd forgotten. But the more I wrote, the easier it became. I poured everything I'd been holding in for years into those words. My struggles, my regrets, my resilience. For weeks I wrote in secret. After every shift at the store, I'd come home, make tea, and lose myself in the world I was creating. My apartment was tiny, but for those hours, it became a sanctuary. I wasn't Hazel the cashier. I was Hazel the writer again. One morning, during my break, I was scrolling online when an ad caught my eye. National Short Story Competition. Open submissions. Theme. Resilience. I froze. That word, resilience, felt like a sign. The deadline was 2 weeks away. Without overthinking it, I decided to submit something, but not under my real name. The last thing I wanted was for anyone from town, especially him, to find out. I created a pseudonym, Renee Carter. Simple, anonymous, safe. For 14 nights straight, I rewrote The Weight of Silence. I changed entire paragraphs, updated the language, polished the imagery. Every keystroke was an act of defiance. Every sentence, a small victory over the voice in my head that still sounded like Mr. Callahan. My coworkers began to notice a change. "Hazel, you've been smiling lately," one of them said. "What's going on? Secret boyfriend?" I laughed, shaking my head. "No, just working on something." Even Mom noticed. One night, while I was typing in the living room, she looked up from her knitting and smiled softly. "You've got that spark again," she said. Her voice was still weak from the stroke, but her eyes were bright. "Finish what you started, sweetheart." Her words wrapped around me like warmth. It was all the encouragement I needed. When the story was finally done, I read it out loud. Every word, every sentence. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I printed it, signed it, Renee Carter, and mailed it the next morning. I remember standing at the post office, envelope in hand, heart racing. As I slid it into the drop box, I whispered, "Here goes nothing." Then life went back to its quiet rhythm. The store, the bills, the long nights. I almost forgot about the contest entirely. Weeks passed. One evening, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. The notification read, "Congratulations, you've been selected as a finalist in the National Short Story Competition." For a moment, I thought it was spam. I blinked, reread the message, and my heart began to race. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I opened the email, and there it was. My story title listed among the finalists. I sank onto the couch, covering my mouth with my hands. "Mom!" I called out, laughing and crying all at once. "Mom, I did it!" She came into the room slowly, leaning on her cane. "Did what, honey?" "I'm a finalist for a writing contest." Her face lit up, her smile soft but proud. "I knew you would be. I never stopped believing in you." I hugged her tight, tears blurring my vision. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt seen. It wasn't about the prize or the recognition. It was about proving to myself that I could still do this, that the part of me I thought was gone had just been waiting for me to believe again. I spent the rest of the night rereading the email, afraid it might disappear if I looked away. Then I noticed a link at the bottom. "Click here to view the judging panel." Curiosity tugged at me. I wanted to know who had read my story, who had chosen it. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, one name after another, scrolling onto the screen. And then I saw it. Thomas Callahan, retired English teacher, literary columnist. The air left my lungs. For a moment, I just stared at the name, frozen. My mind went blank, then flooded with memories. His classroom, his voice, the sting of humiliation that never quite faded. My stomach twisted. Was it fate, irony, punishment? Of all the people in the world who could have judged my story, it had to be him. I felt the old fear return, the self-doubt, the panic. Would he recognize my writing style? Would he see through the pseudonym? I closed my laptop, heart hammering. It was like the universe had set the stage for a rematch I never asked for. Only this time, I wasn't a scared teenager. This time, I had something to prove. Hazel discovers that Mr. Callahan, the teacher who once humiliated her, is a judge for the contest where her story just became a finalist. I must have reread that name 100 times. Thomas Callahan. It was right there, printed beneath a neatly cropped headshot. He looked older, grayer hair, deeper wrinkles, but it was him. The same sharp eyes that once dissected my essays as if they were riddled with mistakes only he could see. The same self-satisfied smile that haunted my teenage years. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. For a second I thought I might be mistaken. Maybe it was just another Callahan, but then I saw the short biography below his picture. Thomas Callahan, retired English teacher and literary columnist, known for championing emerging writers and fostering excellence in creative writing. I laughed out loud, bitterly, quietly, in disbelief, championing emerging writers. That's rich. I remembered the way he'd looked at me in the grocery store, pity and judgment dripping from his voice. So this was his new persona, mentor, literary guide, supporter of young talent. I sat frozen at my desk, the glow of the laptop screen casting pale light across the room. My hands trembled on the keyboard. He couldn't possibly recognize me. I'd used a pseudonym, and the story was updated, new characters, different setting. But the heart of it, the emotion, was still mine. Still the same Hazel who had once poured her soul into words he said would never take her anywhere. Panic clawed at my chest. What if he read it and knew? What if he recognized my voice, the same one he'd silenced years ago? For a fleeting moment, I considered withdrawing. I hovered over the Contact Us button on the contest website, imagining the email I could write. Dear organizers, I'd like to retract my submission due to personal reasons. It would be easy. No confrontation, no risk, no humiliation, just another quiet retreat. Then I heard my mother's voice from the living room, humming softly along with the old radio. Her presence grounded me. I closed the laptop and sat beside her on the couch. Mom, I said quietly, what if someone from my past was judging my story? Someone who wasn't kind to me back then? She looked up, knitting needles paused midair. What do you mean? It's my old teacher, the one who, well, you remember. Her face softened with understanding. The one who made you stop writing. I nodded. He's one of the judges. I feel sick thinking about it. She set her knitting down and reached for my hand. Her skin was thin and warm. Hazel, if you let one man's opinion stop you again, you'll be giving him power he doesn't deserve. You already lost your voice once because of him. Don't do it again. Her words settled deep inside me like an anchor. That night, instead of writing, I opened a blank notebook, the one I now used for journaling, and poured everything out. Page after page, I wrote about him, about the fear, the anger, the shame, about how small I used to feel sitting in his classroom, about the grocery store encounter that had reopened old wounds. But I also wrote about how far I'd come. I wasn't that fragile 17-year-old anymore. I was a woman who had worked herself raw, who had faced life and didn't crumble. I'd kept going even when no one clapped, even when the world looked down on me. Somewhere in those messy, emotional pages, a realization began to take shape. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me finally reclaiming what I lost. Over the next few weeks, I went back to my normal routine. The contest faded to the back of my mind, though sometimes when I closed my eyes, I imagined Mr. Callahan reading my story, line by line, not knowing whose words he was praising or judging. Would he recognize me in the prose? Would he feel the sting of irony if he knew who Renee Carter really was? When the email finally arrived, I almost missed it. It was buried under coupons and newsletters. Subject line simple. Congratulations to our first place winner. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My hands went cold. Then I clicked. Dear Renee Carter, we're delighted to inform you that your story, The Weight of Silence, has been awarded first place in this year's National Short Story Competition. The words blurred before my eyes. My heart thudded in my ears. I reread the email over and over until it finally sank in. I'd won. I won. The same man who once told me talent meant nothing without discipline, had read my story, and voted it the best. Whether he realized it or not, I had beaten him on his own turf. I screamed, startling my mother. She hurried into the room, worried, until she saw the tears streaming down my face. "Hazel, what is it?" I threw my arms around her. "I won, Mom. I actually won." She laughed, hugging me tightly. "Oh, Hazel, I knew it. I always knew it." We celebrated with cheap takeout and apple pie that night. It wasn't a glamorous victory, but it felt like the world had shifted, just a little, in my favor. A week later, I got another email, an invitation to an award luncheon in the city to honor the finalists and judges. As I read the details, venue, time, dress code, my excitement dimmed. The judges would all be there, including him. I could almost hear his voice, could almost see his raised eyebrow when he realized who Renee Carter really was. Part of me wanted to decline. The fear crept back in, whispering that I didn't belong among real writers, that I'd only gotten lucky. But then another part, quieter, stronger, spoke up. Maybe this was my chance. Not for revenge, not even for validation, but for closure. He had seen me at my lowest, dismissed me as wasted potential. Now he would see me standing tall, my work recognized, my voice heard. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, studying the woman reflected there. I wasn't the girl from his classroom anymore. I wasn't the grocery store clerk who had smiled through humiliation. I was the woman who'd found her words again. As I turned off the light, I made my decision. I would go to the luncheon. Not to prove anything to him, but to finally prove something to myself. Hazel decides to attend the award luncheon, not for revenge, but for closure, ready to face the man who once broke her spirit. The morning of the luncheon, I woke up before dawn. The excitement and nerves wouldn't let me sleep. My tiny apartment felt quieter than usual, like it understood something monumental was about to happen. I made myself coffee, but my hands trembled so much that half of it spilled onto the counter. I wasn't nervous about crowds or speeches. I was nervous about him. Mom watched me pace around the living room, ironing and re-ironing the same simple navy blue dress I'd borrowed from a coworker. "You look beautiful already," she said, smiling weakly from the couch. "Stop fussing." "It's not enough," I muttered, smoothing imaginary wrinkles. "Everyone else will be wearing designer clothes. I'll look like an imposter." She chuckled. "You're not going there to impress anyone, Hazel. You're going there because you earned it." I swallowed hard. I can't believe I'm really doing this." Mom reached for my hand. "You deserve this moment, and whatever happens, remember, you're not the same girl who sat in his class all those years ago." Those words became my armor. By noon, I stood outside the downtown hotel where the luncheon was held. The building loomed tall and glittering, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The ballroom buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. Writers, editors, journalists, and photographers filled the space, their name tags flashing under chandeliers. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. I could almost taste the success in the room. I walked to the registration table, trying to ignore the thundering in my chest. "Name?" the woman at the desk asked with a polite smile. "Renee Carter," I said smoothly. She checked her list, found the name, and handed me a badge. "Congratulations on your win, Miss Carter. Your table's near the front, next to the judges." My stomach tightened. "Of course it is," I murmured. As I pinned the badge to my dress, I scanned the room and froze. He was there. Mr. Callahan stood near the stage, surrounded by a small group of people. His hair had gone completely gray, but the posture was unmistakable. Chin slightly lifted, hands gesturing as he spoke. He was laughing, the kind of confident laugh that once made students try harder just to earn it. He looked older, yes, but still every bit the man who had once held so much power over me. I felt a familiar rush of emotions, fear, resentment, disbelief, but this time something was different. I didn't shrink. I didn't look away. I just watched him, detached, almost curious. He had no idea who I was. When the luncheon began, we all took our seats. I ended up just 3 tables away from him. The host welcomed everyone, thanking the sponsors and praising the exceptional storytelling showcase that year. I listened, half focused, my pulse quickening with every word. Then the host's tone lifted. And now, our first place winner, Renee Carter, for her story, The Weight of Silence. Applause erupted. My heart jumped. I stood, legs trembling, and walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, blinding even, but I smiled through it. The applause felt surreal, echoing like waves. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Callahan clapping along with everyone else, completely unaware that he was honoring the same girl he once dismissed as wasted potential. When they handed me the crystal plaque, I turned to face the audience. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He smiled politely, not recognizing me. I took the microphone, palms slick with nerves. My voice quivered at first, but then I remembered Mom's words. I straightened my shoulders and began. I used to think that success meant being seen by the right people, but I've learned that sometimes you have to keep believing in yourself, even when no one else does. A hush fell over the room. I continued, letting emotion guide me. There were times I gave up on writing, times I believed I didn't have what it took. But words, they never left me. They waited for me to find the courage to use them again. And today, I want to dedicate this to anyone who's ever been told they weren't enough. You are. Keep going. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Some people even stood. My chest tightened with pride and disbelief. I caught Mr. Callahan's expression. He looked thoughtful. His usual smirk softened into something that almost resembled regret? Or was it recognition? When I stepped off the stage, several attendees congratulated me, handing me cards, praising my beautifully emotional story. I smiled and thanked them all, but my eyes kept flicking toward the man who had once destroyed my confidence with a single sentence. He approached after a few minutes, weaving through the crowd until he stood in front of me. Up close, he looked more fragile than I remembered. The years had drawn lines across his face, and his eyes no longer held that sharp, dismissive glint. "Ms. Carter," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Thomas Callahan. I was one of the judges this year. Your story, it was remarkable." I shook his hand, steady and calm. "Thank you. That means a lot." "You have a rare voice," he continued. "Your narrative control, your emotional depth, it's impressive. If you ever need a mentor, someone to help refine your craft, I'd be happy to offer guidance." I almost laughed at the irony. For a heartbeat, the room faded away, replaced by memories of his classroom. The humiliation, the disappointment, the sting of his words. And now, here he was, offering to mentor me. I smiled faintly, holding his gaze. "Funny," I said softly. "You already did." He blinked, confusion crossing his face. "I'm sorry?" I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. "You taught me something important years ago, Mr. Callahan. That sometimes the harshest lessons come from the people who doubt us the most." His brows furrowed slightly. I saw the realization flicker behind his eyes, like a light slowly turning on. His lips parted, but before he could speak, someone called my name from across the room, asking for a photo. I excused myself, leaving him standing there, stunned. As I posed for pictures, I could feel his gaze on me. Not the judging, superior look I remembered, but something softer, haunted, maybe even remorseful. Later, as the luncheon wound down, I took one last look at him from across the room. He was sitting alone at a table, staring into his half-empty glass of wine. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt free. Walking out of that ballroom, the sunlight hit my face through the tall glass windows, warm and blinding. My chest felt light, my heart steady. He had once written the ending to my story, but now I was the one holding the pen. Hazel leaves the luncheon after revealing her identity subtly, walking away stronger, unaware that this is only the beginning of her true redemption arc. The luncheon ended, but the tension in my chest didn't. As the crowd thinned and laughter faded into echoes, I found myself lingering near the back of the ballroom, my plaque clutched tightly against my chest. I could have just left, escaped into the afternoon sun, and called it closure. But something in me refused to go without saying what I'd carried for 15 years. Mr. Callahan was still seated near the front, gathering his papers and speaking quietly with another judge. He looked smaller now, deflated somehow. The self-assured posture he wore earlier had wilted. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. Each step made my pulse quicken. I wasn't trembling from fear this time. It was something else. Resolve. "Mr. Callahan?" He turned, surprised. "Ah, Ms. Carter, you were wonderful up there. Your speech moved everyone. I wanted to congratulate you again." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, but there's something I should tell you." He looked curious. "Oh?" "It's about your offer," I began slowly. "You said you'd be happy to mentor me. The truth is, you already did, years ago." He tilted his head, puzzled. "I'm sorry, I don't follow." I met his eyes. "You once had a student named Hazel. Hazel Moore." The name hung in the air between us like a sudden chill. His brow furrowed at first, as if searching his memory. Then, almost imperceptibly, I saw it. The flicker of realization. He blinked, mouth parting slightly. "Hazel." I nodded. "Yes, that Hazel." Color drained from his face. He straightened in his chair, his composure unraveling. "My God, I didn't recognize you." "I know." My tone stayed gentle. "It's been a long time." He stared at me, stunned. His voice dropped low, almost ashamed. You were one of my brightest students. I used to tell you that, didn't I? You had so much potential. And then, you just stopped writing." A faint, bitter smile tugged at my lips. "You're right. I did stop, because of something you said." He swallowed hard, eyes darting away, as if the memory physically stung. "Hazel, I don't remember everything I said to my students, but if I hurt you, I truly didn't mean to." "You told me talent meant nothing without discipline," I said quietly, in front of everyone. "You humiliated me when my grades slipped. I was working nights then, trying to help my family. You never asked why. You just assumed I'd given up." He winced, rubbing his temple. "I was harsher back then. Too proud of my own standards. I thought I was motivating my students." "You broke me," I said softly, not accusingly, just truthfully. "You made me believe I didn't deserve to write." His hands trembled slightly. "Hazel, please understand. I thought I was helping. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." I watched him, the man who once held all the power, now shrinking under the weight of regret. The silence between us stretched, heavy and real. Finally, I said, "You know what's funny? You were right about one thing. Life doesn't care about excuses, but it also doesn't care about shame. I learned that the hard way." He looked up, meeting my gaze. "I don't know if apologies are enough, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry, truly." Something in his voice cracked, genuine, raw, and for the first time, I saw not the intimidating teacher, but an old man haunted by his own mistakes. "I suppose," he continued, voice low, "I was projecting my own frustrations. I wanted to be a novelist once, never had the courage. Instead, I took it out on students who did." The confession hit me harder than I expected. He looked broken in that moment. Small, human, fragile. "I lost my job, you know," he added with a humorless chuckle. "A few years after you graduated. Parents complained I was too demeaning, too old-fashioned, they said. Maybe they were right. I didn't realize how many lives I might have hurt." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then quietly, I replied, "You did hurt me, but you also taught me something valuable." He looked at me, confused. "You taught me how words can destroy," I said. "But that means they can also rebuild. That's what my story was about. The weight of silence, the power of reclaiming your voice. So, thank you." Not sarcastically. Honestly, you pushed me, even if it was through pain. His eyes glistened. "Hazel, I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly, "but I'm giving it anyway." He exhaled, shoulders sagging as though the air had finally been let out of him. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just remember." I placed a hand lightly on his arm, one final gesture, and then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could feel his gaze following, heavy with realization. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The power dynamic that had once crushed me was gone. The scales had finally balanced. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting golden streaks through the glass doors of the hotel. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the cool air. The city hummed with life around me, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. When I got home that night, Mom was asleep, the TV flickering with soft static. I placed the award plaque on the shelf beside her photo from my graduation, the one where I'd smiled through uncertainty. This time, my smile was real. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began typing again. Not a story, not a speech, just thoughts about forgiveness, about power, about how people can wound others without even realizing it, and how those wounds can still heal. I wrote until the clock ticked past midnight. When I finally closed the laptop, a quiet calm settled over me. For so long, I'd let my past define me, his words, his judgment, his disappointment. But tonight, that chapter was done. I wasn't that girl anymore. I whispered to the quiet room, "You don't get to decide my story anymore." Then I went to bed, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through my curtains, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I blinked awake, groggy, and reached for it. A new email notification glowed on the screen. Subject, publishing inquiry. We loved your story. I sat up straight, pulse quickening. The message preview read, "Dear Ms. Carter, we came across your short story and would love to discuss the possibility of a book collection." I covered my mouth, laughing through tears. It wasn't just validation anymore. It was an invitation to a whole new beginning. Hazel's emotional confrontation frees her from the past, just in time for an unexpected email from a publishing house that could change her life forever. When the email arrived, I thought it was a scam. A publishing house? Wanting to talk about my story? It felt too surreal to be true. But after a few cautious replies and a video call with an actual editor, it became real. They wanted to publish a short story collection. Mine. The offer wasn't huge, but it was more money than I'd ever seen at once. They called it a modest advance, but to me, it was freedom. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Mom, the email open on my laptop, both of us staring at the numbers. "Hazel," she whispered, tears brimming, "you did it. You really did it." I laughed through tears. I guess I did. That night, I signed the contract. Over the next few months, my life shifted in quiet but powerful ways. I still worked part-time at the grocery store, but now I had something bigger waiting at home. Deadlines, edits, interviews. My story, The Weight of Silence, was published online as part of the marketing campaign. To my surprise, it went viral. People connected to it, its vulnerability, its message of reclaiming your voice. Comments poured in from readers who saw themselves in it. "You reminded me to start writing again. I needed this today. I feel seen." Every message was like a piece of my broken confidence being glued back together. Within weeks, the publisher offered me a small tour, local bookstores, a few speaking engagements. Nothing grand, but to me, it was everything. The first royalty check came a few months later. I remember holding it in my hands, feeling like it was made of gold. It wasn't fortune money, but it was enough to move Mom into a proper rehabilitation facility where she could get daily therapy, enough to cut back my shifts to part-time, enough to breathe. I started waking up early just to write, the way I used to as a girl. The apartment felt lighter, brighter, like life had color again. And then, one ordinary Saturday, something happened that made the circle complete. I had driven to the grocery store, that grocery store, for the first time in months. Not to work, but to shop. The place looked the same as ever. The same faded tiles, the same flickering fluorescent lights, the same hum of checkout scanners echoing faintly through the aisles. As I pushed my cart through produce, I saw him. Mr. Callahan. He was standing by the frozen foods, staring blankly at the selection of microwavable dinners. He looked older, thinner, smaller somehow. His once perfect posture was bent, his movements slow. There was no crowd around him now, no adoring students or colleagues. Just a man who looked quietly tired of the world. For a moment, I froze. Part of me wanted to turn around to avoid the awkwardness, but something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or compassion. I took a deep breath and continued shopping. When I got in line at checkout, I realized he was in the next lane over. His basket was half empty. Bread, milk, canned soup, a few vegetables. The cashier, a young guy barely out of high school, greeted him politely. I watched as Mr. Callahan fumbled for his wallet, his hands trembling slightly. The card reader beeped, declined. He tried again, declined. The cashier's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir, it's not going through." I saw the color drain from Mr. Callahan's face. He glanced around, embarrassed, his voice cracking slightly. It should work. Maybe I used the wrong card." People in line began to shift impatiently. I could see the shame written all over him. It was the same shame I'd felt years ago, standing in front of his classroom while laughter echoed around me. But instead of anger, I felt something unexpected, understanding. Before I could overthink it, I stepped out of my line and walked over. "I've got it," I said gently, sliding my card into the reader. The cashier blinked. "Are you sure?" "Positive," I said with a small smile. Mr. Callahan turned slowly, confusion clouding his eyes. I can't let you do that," he stammered. "It's fine," I said softly. "Consider it overdue payment for a few lessons." The total flashed on the screen, $18.47. I pressed approve. The machine chirped, and the transaction went through. He stood there frozen, his mouth slightly open. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," I interrupted gently. He stared at me, searching my face. Then recognition dawned. His eyes widened. "Hazel?" I nodded. "Hi, Mr. Callahan." For a long moment, he just looked at me, speechless, eyes glassy with emotion. I didn't recognize you. You look different." "I feel different," I said. He swallowed hard, still processing everything. "You shouldn't have done that. I can pay you back when—" "Don't worry about it," I said. "You once taught me the power of words. Now mine pay the bills." He blinked, his lips trembling. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I was wrong about you, Hazel." I smiled softly, shaking my head. "No, you just didn't see me. Yet." The young cashier glanced between us, clearly confused but smiling faintly. Mr. Callahan took his bag of groceries, his movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. Before he walked away, he turned back one more time. "I read your story," he said quietly. "The weight of silence. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. He hesitated. It reminded me of someone I used to know. I met his gaze. "Maybe it's time you forgive him." For a second, his expression crumpled. Then he nodded, eyes wet. "Maybe it is." He left, and I stood there for a while, watching him disappear through the sliding glass doors. The cashier handed me my receipt. "That was nice of you," he said. I smiled, tucking it into my bag. "It wasn't kindness," I murmured. It was closure. On the drive home, I thought about how poetic it all was. The way life folds in on itself, the way tables turn without warning. Years ago, I'd stood behind that counter, feeling worthless as he looked down on me. Now, I'd stood in front of it, choosing compassion when I could have chosen pride. That night, as I unpacked my groceries, my phone buzzed. A message from my editor. "Your collection just hit the bestseller list in regional stores. Congratulations, Hazel. The world is finally seeing your voice." I laughed softly to myself. Mr. Callahan had once taught me how powerful words could be. He just never imagined mine would one day feed us both. Mr. Callahan humbly admits he was wrong. Hazel's quiet act of grace seals her growth, and as her career blossoms, fate gives her the ultimate poetic closure. I didn't expect my story to spread the way it did. At first, it was just a small piece in the local paper, a human interest story tucked between city announcements and weekend events. The headline read, "From grocery clerk to award-winning author, the story of Hazel Moore." The journalist, a kind woman named Lacey, had interviewed me after hearing about my book's local success. She sat in my small apartment, sipping tea, while I told her everything, not about revenge, but about resilience. I talked about long nights behind the register, about rediscovering the notebook I thought I'd outgrown, and about how failure can sometimes be the beginning of something greater. I didn't mention Mr. Callahan by name. I didn't have to. Lacey titled the article with compassion, not scandal. 2 days later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The story had gone viral. People were sharing it with captions like, "Never give up on your dreams," and "Proof that it's never too late to start again." Readers from all over wrote to me, Teachers, single parents, struggling artists, each message echoing the same sentiment. You gave me hope. The ripple effect was surreal. Bookstores sold out of my short story collection within a week. Schools and local community centers began inviting me to speak to students about perseverance, creativity, and the power of storytelling. It felt strange standing on stages now, the same kind of space where I used to shrink in my seat, afraid to speak up. Only now, I was the one holding the microphone. My first talk was at a small high school not far from where I'd grown up. The principal, a woman around my age, greeted me with genuine warmth. "We're so honored to have you, Hazel," she said. "Your story has inspired our students, and frankly, our staff too." The auditorium was packed. Rows of teenagers sat slouched in their seats, their faces lit by the blue glow of phones, until I started speaking. "I wasn't much older than most of you when I decided I wasn't good enough," I began. "Someone I looked up to made me believe I didn't have what it took, and I let that belief shape my life for far too long." As I spoke, the crowd quieted. I told them about fear, about falling down, about rediscovering passion in the unlikeliest of places. But I made sure to emphasize this, that one person's opinion is never the full story of who you are. By the end, they were clapping. Some were even crying. It wasn't the kind of applause that fed your ego. It was the kind that fed your soul. Afterward, a few students approached me with notebooks in hand, asking for advice, or sometimes just to say, "Thank you." I looked at their hopeful faces and saw glimpses of the girl I used to be, and the one who believed but had no one to believe with her. Over the next few months, the speaking invitations grew. I traveled across towns and counties, telling my story again and again, each time refining it, learning from it. But no event meant more than the one invitation that arrived in a cream-colored envelope with my old school's emblem embossed at the top. "We'd be honored if you'd come speak to our senior class at the end of year assembly," the letter read. I stared at it for a long time. My alma mater. The same halls where I'd first felt small, unseen, and dismissed. The thought of going back made my chest tighten, but deep down, I knew I had to. When the day came, the building felt smaller than I remembered. The same blue lockers, the same smell of chalk and floor polish. The auditorium hadn't changed either. Rows of wooden seats, stage curtains slightly frayed at the edges. Before the event, the principal introduced me in glowing terms. "Today, we welcome a former student who turned her setbacks into success. She's proof that resilience and belief in yourself can take you anywhere." The applause began before I even reached the podium. I glanced out over the sea of faces, my palms sweaty, but my heart calm. Then, in the back row, my eyes landed on a figure I hadn't expected. Mr. Callahan. He was sitting quietly, hands clasped, his expression unreadable. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, finally. Standing in the place I once feared, unafraid, I took the microphone and smiled. When I was a student here, I loved writing. I had big dreams. But somewhere along the way, I let someone else's opinion silence me. It took years to find my voice again, but I did. And that's why I'm here today. To tell you that failure isn't final. It's just a pause in your story. A hush fell over the room. I could see teachers nodding, students leaning forward. I spoke about my journey, about compassion, and about how sometimes forgiveness is the greatest form of freedom. Toward the end, I said, "If anyone here feels like their dream is too far away, trust me, it's closer than you think. All it takes is one more try." When I finished, the auditorium erupted in applause, louder, longer, fuller than any I'd ever heard. Some students stood, others wiped their eyes, and in the very back I saw him, Mr. Callahan, clapping too. His eyes glistened, his lips trembling just slightly. That moment felt like something unspoken between us had finally settled. There was no bitterness, no anger, just quiet understanding. After the crowd dispersed, he approached me slowly. His steps were unsure, his smile soft. "Hazel," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I wanted to thank you." I met his eyes, waiting. "For forgiving me," he said, and for showing me grace. I don't think I've ever learned more from a former student than I have from you." I nodded. "You taught me a lot too, Mr. Callahan. Just not in the way either of us expected." He chuckled softly, the sound trembling with emotion. "Maybe that's what teaching really is," he murmured. "We all keep learning, even when we think our lessons are over." We shook hands. His were rougher now, his grip weaker, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time, I felt at peace. Driving home that evening, the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in orange and gold. The radio played softly, but I barely heard it. My heart was full. The past didn't haunt me anymore. It had become part of the story I told to help others heal. When I got home, I tossed my keys onto the table and checked my phone, expecting nothing more than the usual emails and reminders, but there it was, an unknown number with a message preview that made my breath hitch. "We've reviewed your manuscript. Call us as soon as possible. We'd like to discuss national publication." For a moment, the world went still. Then I laughed, a deep, uncontrollable laugh that filled the empty apartment. Mom called from the other room, asking what was so funny. "Nothing," I said through happy tears. "Just something wonderful." I didn't know it yet, but my story, the one that started behind a grocery counter, was about to reach farther than I'd ever imagined. Hazel's story of resilience comes full circle as she inspires others, and just as she finds peace, a call from a publisher offers her the chance to go national, signaling the next chapter of her destiny. If someone had told the girl behind the grocery counter that she'd one day be signing books with her name embossed in gold, I would have laughed. Not out of disbelief, but because that version of me couldn't even imagine it. Yet there I was, 5 years later, sitting behind a long table at a bustling bookstore in Chicago, a stack of my debut novels gleaming beside me, and a line of readers curling around the corner. The title on the cover read, "The Weight of Silence," the same story that had started everything. Only now, it wasn't just a short story. It was a full-length novel, expanded, refined, alive. The reviews called it raw and lyrical, an anthem of quiet strength. I still stumbled over those words whenever I read them, unable to believe they were describing me. The national launch had exceeded every expectation. Within 2 months, the book became a bestseller, landing on lists I used to dream about as a college student. The publisher sent me on tour, New York, Seattle, Austin, Atlanta, each stop another surreal reminder of how far I'd come. But beyond the success, what moved me most was the people. Readers didn't just come for the autograph. They came to tell me their stories. The single mother who went back to school at 40. The teenager who'd been told her art wasn't practical. The retired man who'd started writing again after 50 years. Every face, every tearful smile felt like a thread connecting us all. I used my growing platform to talk about what mattered most: adult education, creativity, and second chances. I partnered with literacy programs, spoke at libraries, and donated part of my royalties to scholarships for women returning to school. Each step forward felt like lighting a candle for someone still walking through the dark. Through it all, Mom was by my side. She'd regained much of her strength by then, her mobility better, her spirit stronger. I still remember the first book event she attended. She sat in the front row, her eyes glistening, clutching a copy of my book like it was the most precious thing in the world. Afterward, she pulled me into a hug and whispered, "Your father would have been so proud." That one sentence carried every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every maybe someday that had finally become today. Months passed in a blur of interviews, flights, deadlines, and letters from readers around the world. But one invitation hit me differently. It came from my old high school. "Dear Ms. Moore, we would be honored if you could visit for a special assembly and donate copies of your book to our library. Your story continues to inspire our students." When I read those words, I couldn't help but smile. Life, it seemed, had a poetic sense of timing. Walking back through those familiar hallways felt like stepping into a dream. The lockers were still the same, shade of blue. The trophy case still gleamed with dust-polished awards. But now my picture hung among the framed photos on the notable alumni wall. right next to doctors, engineers, and city leaders. I traced the plaque beneath my photo, the letters etched deep into the brass, Hazel Moore, author and advocate. I had to blink back tears. The principal greeted me warmly and handed me a microphone. "Hazel, your story is already part of our school's history," she said. "But today, we'd love for you to share it in your own words." The auditorium filled quickly. Rows of students whispered and giggled. But when I stepped onto the stage, the noise faded into quiet anticipation. My heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. I looked out over the audience and smiled. "I used to sit where you're sitting," I began. "I used to dream about the future, certain it would unfold exactly as I planned. But life had other ideas." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. I continued. "I worked at a grocery store for years after dropping out of college. I thought my story was over before it really began. But what I didn't realize then was that life doesn't erase dreams. It just hides them for a while, waiting for the moment you're brave enough to pick them back up." I saw heads nodding, students leaning forward. The teachers smiled. I learned that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. Every setback, every no, every moment you think you've reached the end. It's just a chapter, not the whole book. As I spoke, I thought of that night behind the grocery counter. The fluorescent lights, the weight of Mr. Callahan's words, the burn of humiliation that had once crushed me. And now, standing on this stage, I realized that moment hadn't broken me. It had built me. My voice softened as I said, "Never let anyone tell you where you'll end up. Not your teachers, not your bosses, not even your own fears. Only you get to decide that." The silence that followed was electric. Then suddenly the entire auditorium rose in applause. The sound washed over me like a tide. In the back of the room, I saw Mr. Callahan again. He was older now, moving slowly with a cane, but his expression was one of pride. Not regret, not sorrow, just quiet pride. He nodded once. I nodded back. After the applause, the principal invited me to present the books I'd brought. I handed over a box of my novels, each one inscribed with a message. For the dreamers who think it's too late, it never is. When the assembly ended, students lined up to talk to me, some shy, others eager. One girl, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "I want to be a writer too, but my dad says it's a waste of time." I smiled and handed her a signed copy of my book. "Tell him this one was written by someone who packed groceries." She grinned, and I saw a flicker of confidence spark in her eyes. Later, as I walked through the courtyard on my way out, I glanced up at the building's tall windows, reflecting the afternoon sun. I remembered my 17-year-old self walking those same steps, books clutched to my chest, doubts heavy in my heart. That girl had no idea what was waiting for her. Back at home that evening, I sat at my writing desk, the award plaque still gleaming under the lamp. My inbox was full. Offers, interviews, invitations. But I didn't rush to answer any of them. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first line of my next novel. Sometimes, the places that break you are the same ones that build you. I paused, smiling at the words. Then I whispered to myself, as if sealing the journey with one final thought, "I packed groceries once. Now I pack words that feed the soul." And with that, I began to write again. This time, without fear, without shame, and without looking back. In the end, I realized success isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, graceful, and served with kindness. The man who once mocked my failure now knows the strength that silence can hold. I didn't need to prove him wrong with anger. I did it by becoming everything he said I couldn't be. Life has a way of circling back, not for revenge, but for revelation. I packed groceries once. Now I pack words that feed souls. Sometimes life gives us a chance to rise, not to prove others wrong, but to prove ourselves right. If this story touched something inside you, don't forget to share it, because someone out there might need this reminder today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone and later proved them wrong without saying a word?